In this video, we're going to take a look at quadratic formula. Quadratic formula is used to solve quadratic equations, especially when you can't factor them. The first step to using the quadratic formula is to put it into standard form. Remember, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So you might have to set your equation equal to 0 before you can do the quadratic formula. And from standard form, we go ahead and identify what are our values for a, b, and c. We can then take these values and substitute them into the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All of this gets divided by 2a. So you plug in all your values into quadratic formula, and then you just need to simplify to get your answer. But we'll take a look at some actual examples so you can see how we go about simplifying. In this first problem, we're going to use quadratic formula to solve x squared minus 3x minus 40 equals 0. So our first step is to identify what the a, b, and c values are. Remember, there's no number in front of the x squared. That would be a 1. So our a value is 1. Our b value is negative 3. And our c value is negative 40. Since we're just getting started with quadratic formula, it's probably a good idea to just copy the whole thing down, maybe for a couple weeks, until you've got it completely memorized. So the next thing I like to do is to go ahead and write the whole thing out and leave spaces for my numbers. I do this because there's two spaces in the quadratic formula where people often make mistakes with the signs. The first place is at the start, and by putting a negative parentheses, I won't forget about that negative sign in front of the b. The second place where mistakes happen a lot is with the sign that we end up between the b squared and the minus 4ac. So this is why I like to leave spaces for the values and then go ahead and enter them in. So let's enter in our b value of negative 3. That also goes with our b squared. And then we have negative 4 times the a value of 1 and the c value of negative 40. And then on the bottom, we have 2 times the a value of 1. Now we can just start simplifying this. The first thing that gets simplified is that negative 3. So we have two negatives there. So that would become positive 3. Then we have plus or minus the square root, and then negative 3 squared is positive 9. That's always going to be a positive unless you had a b value of 0, but it will never be negative. Now the next part is the most common place where people mess up the sign. And the way I like to think of this, don't think of it as minus 4ac. Think of that as a negative 4 times a positive 1 times a negative 40. And you can first just count the negative signs. You're always going to have one negative sign with the negative 4. And then in this case, I have a second negative sign with the negative 40. So then just think, if you have two negatives that are being multiplied, what sign do you get? In this case, we'd get a positive. Now I worry about just going 4 times 1 times 40, which is 160. And then on the bottom, we have 2 times 1, which is 2. All right, we're not done. We have to continue simplifying this. So the next thing we'll do is 9 plus 160 is 169. Sometimes that square root is a perfect square, and we can simplify it further. So the square root of 169 is actually 13. From this point, we're going to break this off into two possible answers because of the plus minus. So we could have 3 plus 13 divided by 2, and we could also have 3 minus 13 divided by 2. Then we just simplify these separately. On the left, we get 16 divided by 2, which is 8. And on the right, we get negative 10 divided by 2, which is negative 5. Let's go ahead and try another one. So we start by identifying that our a value is negative 3, our b value is positive 8, and our c value is negative 4. Now we should go ahead and copy our quadratic formula. And then again, I like to copy it again and leave spaces for my numbers. We'll put in positive 8 for the b value, do it again for the b squared, and then we have negative 4 times the a value of negative 3 and the c value of negative 4. And on the bottom, we have 2 times negative 3. Now we can start simplifying. So we got to make sure we get the sign right at the very start. Notice this time, we just have the one negative sign because the 8 is positive. So that gives us x equals negative 8 plus or minus the square root. 8 times 8 is 64. And now we got to figure out the sign that goes after the 64. This time, there are 3 negative signs. We have a negative 4, a negative 3, and a negative 4 for our negative 4ac part. So 3 negatives, an odd number of negatives, means that sign is negative. Now worry about multiplying the numbers. 4 times 3 is 12, and 12 times 4 is 48. On the bottom, we have 2 times negative 3, which is negative 6. Now we can simplify the square root part. 64 minus 48 gives us 16. And the square root of 16 is another perfect square. That's 4. So now we go ahead and split it into our two possibilities of negative 8 plus 4 divided by negative 6 and negative 8 minus 4 divided by negative 6. And now we'll go ahead and just simplify. On the left, we end up with negative 4 over negative 6. We can get rid of the negatives there, and we can simplify our fraction to 2/3. On the right side, we end up with negative 12 divided by negative 6, which is positive 2. Last problem. If you want, you can pause the video and try it out yourself. Just realize that the ending of this one will be a little different than the previous two. Let's take a look at the answer. So the first step is to go ahead and identify your a, b, and c values. There's no a value written in front of the x squared, so it would be a 1. So a is 1, b is negative 5, and c is positive 3. You should go ahead and copy your quadratic formula. And then I like to copy it one more time and leave spaces. And then I'll go ahead and put my negative 5 in the parentheses for negative b. I got plus or minus negative 5 for b squared, negative 4 times an a value of 1 and a c value of 3. This goes over 2 times the a value of 1. Now we can go ahead and start simplifying. So you can clearly see that there are 2 negatives right at the start. We have negative 5, and this simplifies to positive 5, plus or minus the square root. Negative 5 times negative 5 is 25, and now we got to figure out the sign. So in this case, we have a negative 4, positive 1, positive 3 for negative 4ac. With only one negative, the sign will be negative. And now we can go 4 times 1 times 3 and get 12. And on the bottom, we have divided by 2. Now we go ahead and simplify this by going 25 minus 12 to get 5 plus or minus radical 13 over 2. Unlike the two previous problems, radical 13 is not a perfect square. So you could stop right here. That's your answer. Sometimes teachers will like you to go ahead and split it anyways into 5 plus radical 13 over 2 or 5 minus radical 13 over 2. This is the case where you really need to use quadratic formula instead of factoring. Anytime you don't get a perfect square, you could not factor that. So that's the real value of quadratic formula. We can solve problems that are not factorable. So it turns out there's actually kind of an easy, simple, silly way to remember the quadratic formula. You can actually sing the quadratic formula to the tune Pop Goes the Weasel. So here we go. X equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So there you go. We took Pop Goes the Weasel, which is originally about selling your coat to go on a drinking binge, and put it to maybe some better use, helping us memorize the quadratic formula.